Picture this. Two people sitting across from each other, seemingly engaged in a simple conversation. But beneath the surface, an invisible battle rages. A contest not of words, but of reality itself. One person will walk away, having defined what this interaction meant, what was said, and what it all implies. The other will accept that definition without ever realizing they had a choice. So here's the question that should unsettle you. In your last conversation, were you the architect of meaning, or merely a tenant in someone else's construction? Machiavelli understood something that most people still fail to grasp today. Power doesn't flow to those who speak the loudest or possess the most facts. Power flows to those who control the frame, the invisible architecture that determines how everything within a conversation is interpreted and understood. But what exactly is the frame? Think of it as the lens through which reality is filtered. It's the underlying assumption, the unspoken premise, the context that gives meaning to every word exchanged. When you control the frame, you don't just participate in the conversation. You define the terms of engagement itself. You determine what's reasonable, what's extreme, what's worth discussing, and what's already settled. The terrifying truth: most people never even realize the frame exists. They believe they're thinking freely, forming independent judgments, engaging in genuine dialogue. Meanwhile, they're operating entirely within a structure someone else built for them. Consider how this plays out in everyday life. An employee walks into their boss's office, already thinking in terms of making a request and hoping for approval. The frame is set before a word is spoken. The employee has positioned themselves as a supplicant, the boss as the grantor of favors. Now imagine that same employee entering with a different frame. I'm here to discuss how we can structure this to benefit both the project and my development. Same conversation, entirely different architecture. Machiavelli would recognize this immediately. In The Prince, he wrote extensively about the appearance of things mattering more than their substance. But he understood something deeper. Whoever controls the appearance doesn't just shape perception, they shape reality itself. Because in human affairs, perception is reality. The frame operates on multiple levels simultaneously. There's the meta-frame, the big picture understanding of what's happening. Are we having a negotiation or a friendly chat? A confrontation or a collaboration? Then there are micro-frames within every exchange. Who's the expert here? Who needs convincing? What's the problem we're solving? And who gets to define it? Here's where it gets psychologically dark. Most frame control happens through what isn't said. It's the presuppositions embedded in questions. When someone asks, "Why are you so defensive about this?" they've already framed you as defensive. Deny it, and you're confirming the frame by engaging with it on its terms. The frame is a trap that tightens the more you struggle against it. Let's examine how master manipulators, and yes, we must be honest about what we're discussing here, deploy frame control. They understand that the person who sets the frame doesn't need to win arguments. The arguments happen on their terms, within their reality structure. Watch how this unfolds. Person A wants something from person B. An amateur approaches directly, making their desire known, essentially saying, "I want this from you." The frame is immediately adversarial. One person wants, the other decides whether to give. The amateur has handed all the power to person B. The Machiavellian approach? Establish a frame where giving person A what they want is simply the natural, obvious, already assumed course of action. They might start with, "As we move forward with this, I was thinking about the timeline. Notice what just happened? The weather has been skipped entirely. We're now in a frame where moving forward is the given reality, and we're just discussing details. Is this manipulation? Absolutely. Does it work? Devastatingly well. Should we be comfortable with this? That's the question that should keep you up at night. Here's where we must pause and confront the uncomfortable moral territory we've entered. If everyone is constantly attempting to control the frame, isn't all conversation just mutual manipulation? Has Machiavelli reduced human interaction to a cynical power game where sincerity is merely another tactic? Or perhaps the darker realization is this: frame control is always happening whether you're conscious of it or not. The only question is whether you're aware enough to participate actively in this invisible negotiation. Is it more ethical to naively accept whatever frame others impose on you, or to consciously engage with the reality that every conversation is, at some level, a contest for definitional authority? Consider the alternative to conscious frame control: unconscious submission to others' frames. When you automatically accept others' framing, you're not being more authentic or ethical. You're simply being controlled. You're letting others write the story you're living inside of. But here's the razor's edge we must walk carefully. There's a vast difference between maintaining your own frame and aggressively manipulating others. The first is self-determination. The second is predation. Machiavelli, ever the realist, knew both. He described them both. He left it to us to choose which we would become. So how does one defend against frame control without becoming precisely the kind of manipulator Machiavelli might celebrate? Recognition is the first defense. When you feel yourself accepting premises you didn't consciously agree to, when questions make you defensive, when you're arguing about details while the fundamental assumptions remain unexamined, someone is controlling your frame. The counter is to step back and reframe explicitly. I notice we're discussing this as if X is already decided. I don't accept that premise. This isn't aggressive, it's assertive. You're simply making the invisible visible, dragging the frame into the light where it can be negotiated rather than imposed. Another defense: ask questions that expose the frame. What are we assuming here? Why are we discussing this in these terms? What would this conversation look like if we started from a different premise? These questions don't reject the other person's frame. They reveal that a frame exists, making conscious negotiation possible. But perhaps the most powerful defense is having a strong frame of your own, a clear understanding of how you see the world, yourself, and the situation at hand. When your frame is solid, others' attempts to reframe you simply don't land. You're not being stubborn or closed-minded. You're standing in your own construction of reality while remaining open to genuine dialogue about its merits. Here's what Machiavelli understood that makes his insights both timeless and troubling. The person who appears most relaxed, most unbothered by outcomes, most comfortable with either result, that person holds the frame. Desperation destroys frames. Need destroys frames. The moment you must have something, you've surrendered frame control. This is why Machiavelli advised that a prince should be feared rather than loved. Fear is a frame the prince controls, while love makes the prince dependent on others' feelings. In conversation, the same principle applies differently, but just as powerfully. The person who cares least about being liked, about winning approval, about being seen as nice, that person cannot be frame controlled through social pressure. Does this mean becoming cold and manipulative? Not necessarily. It means developing what psychologists call outcome independence, being genuinely okay with either result. When you're truly indifferent, you can't be leveraged. Your frame becomes immovable not through rigidity, but through genuine lack of attachment. But here's the question that complexity demands. Can you maintain outcome independence about everything? Should you? Or are there conversations where caring deeply, where needing a specific outcome, where vulnerability and authentic stakes make for richer human connection than any Machiavellian frame control could achieve? The most fascinating moments occur when two frame-aware people meet. It's like watching two chess masters recognize each other. Neither can easily impose a frame on the other. What happens then? Sometimes it becomes explicit negotiation. Here's how I see this situation. How do you see it? Where can we find common ground? This is frame control becoming conscious, collaborative, and potentially transformative. Both parties acknowledge the frame exists, and both participate in constructing it together. Other times, it escalates into frame warfare. Each person subtly attempting to pull reality toward their construction, neither willing to acknowledge the contest explicitly. These conversations feel strange, slippery, like fighting shadows. Nothing is quite said directly, yet everything is being negotiated. The healthiest resolution? Mature adults who recognize that frames exist, who each have legitimate perspectives, and who can negotiate shared framing explicitly. This isn't manipulation. It's conscious communication. It's bringing the unconscious mechanisms of interaction into awareness, where they can be worked with rather than through. Now you know what most people never see. You understand that beneath every conversation runs an invisible river of frame control. The question becomes, what will you do with this knowledge? You could use it purely for personal advantage, becoming the very Machiavellian prince in miniature that you perhaps initially found distasteful. You could deploy these techniques to win conversations, manipulate outcomes, and accumulate small victories in the endless war of social positioning. Or you could use this awareness differently, as a defensive tool, yes, but also as a path to more honest communication. When you can see the frames operating, you can choose to make them explicit. You can invite others into conscious frame negotiation rather than unconscious frame warfare. The deepest ethical question isn't whether frame control exists. It does, whether we acknowledge it or not. The question is whether bringing it into consciousness makes us more manipulative or more free. Does awareness corrupt us into calculating schemers? Or does it liberate us from being unconscious puppets in others' performances? Machiavelli wrote, "The prince, not to create tyrants, but to reveal what tyrants already knew." He pulled back the curtain on power's actual mechanics, and the world has never forgiven him for it. We prefer our power dynamics hidden, our manipulations invisible, our frame control unconscious. It's more comfortable that way. But comfort is not the same as freedom, and ignorance is not the same as innocence. Every conversation you have today will involve frame control. Someone will define reality. Someone will set the terms. Someone will determine what's reasonable, what's extreme, what's assumed, and what requires proof. The only question is whether you'll be aware of this process or blind to it. Understanding frame control doesn't doom you to a life of cold calculation, any more than understanding anatomy dooms you to being a surgeon. It's simply seeing clearly what was always there. What you do with that vision, whether you use it for domination or liberation, for manipulation or mutual understanding, that remains your choice. Machiavelli would remind us that naivety is not virtue. Refusing to acknowledge how power works doesn't make you good. It makes you vulnerable. The frame will be controlled. The only question is whether you'll have any say in whose construction of reality you're living inside. So the next time you enter a conversation, pay attention to what's being assumed before anything is said. Notice who's setting the terms. Observe the invisible architecture giving shape to every exchange, and then decide. Will you be the architect, or merely another fixture in someone else's design? The frame was always there. Now you can see it. What you do with that sight will define not just your conversations, but the very nature of your reality. Choose carefully, choose consciously, and above all, choose for yourself. Because in the end, that's what frame control really means. Not manipulating others, but refusing to be written into someone else's story without your consent.